boils and ghouls. You are not lost. You're just off the beaten rack. Now, I scour the local comic shops for all types of reference material, for story ideas and interviews and just cool stuff to share with you guys, right? So this week, while I was at the comic shop digging through a box of magazines, I came across this, the Wizard Millennium Edition Alex Ross. You would assume, because it's a Wizard publication, that there's not really going to be a whole lot of wonderful information in here, and you might be right. Usually, but not today, because this is actually pretty cool. I wanted to walk through here. Now, this was published in 1999, and Alex Ross was just really starting to blow up. Like, he'd done Kingdom Come and Marvels and several other things. The Justice series was just getting rolling with Batman War. They cover that in here, actually. Batman War, and there's a Superman Hope on Earth has actually already come out. So we start off the magazine with this interview, Mystery Man. The thing that I've always been interested with Alex Ross's personality is he's always seemed very much like all business. And this interview doesn't tell you a whole heck of a lot about his life, but it tells you a lot about his work. And he, according to the article, and I pretty much believe it, because he seems like a fairly weird guy in a lot of ways. He sleeps until like 1 o'clock and then he gets up and he works until 6 a.m. It gives him like the best chance to avoid getting inundated with phone calls because people are constantly calling him. And during the process of giving this interview to Wizard, he's actually on the phone at one point with a handless headset, and he's drawing the cover to Marvel's X #3 at the same time. It's pretty impressive. It's something that I've heard Jim Lee is also capable of. I think Mark Silvestri might be the other name I've heard tossed around. Well, that's like, as a guy who can actually like be on the phone having a coherent business conversation, drawing some killer stuff, and talking to somebody else. It's pretty impressive. They talk about his work leading up to this point, and right now in 1999, like the big thing that a lot of people are still talking about, I mean they still are today, but one of the big things that people are still bringing up at this point is the Crisis on Infinite Earths cover that he did for the reprint. And man, that it is one of the most impressive pieces of art I've ever seen. And they talk about it in here. They actually ask him about it. And he tells them he worked on it for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for more than 6 weeks. Like, it was huge. You get a good shot of his studio here. This is his living room, apparently. He goes out to eat most of the time, according to the interview, because it saves him time. He keeps a fully furnished house, but only for visitors. And apparently Alex Ross is really big on like company and having visitors and that kind of thing. He talks about how he fell in love with Spider-Man. If you know anything about Alex Ross, then you know Alex Ross has a proclivity of doing a lot of Spider-Man. Not that it's a bad thing. I love his Spider-Man. His Spider-Man is super impressive, but it's also grounded very much in like reality. It's a guy in a suit. And as much as a lot of his other drawings are that way, Spider-Man is even more so. And he tells you why in this, and it's because the first time you ever really saw Spider-Man was just a dude in a suit as part of the Electric Company. Electric Company! Maybe I'll put a clip in, maybe not. Maybe I'll be lazy. Edit that out if you're being lazy. Probably leave that in, even if I am. But he talks about like falling in love with Spider-Man, and that kind of being the idea of a guy in a suit being the idea of Spider-Man that he fell in love with. Oh yeah, there's the quote about the Electric Company. He talks about the Kingdom getting ready to come out. The Kingdom was like DC's follow-up to Kingdom Come, which was in itself the end of superhero comics. Like, it was supposed to be the final tale. So Alex Ross disliked the idea of the Kingdom from the beginning. He talks about how he had ideas and a plot pitch and stuff that happened in the events leading up to Kingdom Come. They are actually covered in another article that are farther in. A lot of Alex Ross's stuff is just, his ideas can be kind of pedestrian. I really wasn't sold on it. I don't know if he's burning on Kurt Wade or what, but he does talk about like how he doesn't like Kurt Wade is still doing the series because he feels like Kurt Wade is getting famous for stuff that he did. So, like, during the interview, Alex Ross actually does go out to eat. And on the way, he goes and he picks up some, like, film reference, because he's really big on film reference. And he's shot, like, members of his family and a couple other things, which he's pretty famous for. If you don't know that, Alex Ross uses members of his family and friends and that kind of thing as photo references all the freaking time. Norman Mccay this is a piece from Kingdom Come, and that's Norman Mccay. He's like the narrator, the main character next to the Spectre. Well, the Spectre is secondary to him, actually, because he's the guiding soul of the Spectre, but Norman Mccay is actually his father. And I will say, as a Wizard publication, I want to say, like, this listed for $5.99 back in the day, in 1999. That was not expensive at all as the price of a magazine. This is pretty well put together. And considering this is freaking Wizard, it's amazing, because they're like, hey, yeah, Norman Mccay looks like his father, right? And then they show you a picture of his dad. Yes, that sounds like funny that I would have to point that out, but this is Wizard, so Alex Ross talks about how he's starting to break into comics monetarily much more at this point. He is no longer doing interiors right now. He's moved out of that after Kingdom Come and Marvels because he was done. I just don't think he could do it. It was driving him crazy. So he's gone into a much more lucrative field of covers at this point. And he's moved out of his old neighborhood, and he talks about actually being kind of alienated from some of his old friends because he lives in this, like, hoity-toity neighborhood. He talks about, like, how as he's come to prominence, some really weird stuff has happened to him. John Romita Sr. actually, like, came up to him at a convention and asked him for some painting tips, and that was pretty mind-blowing. And he also found out that Alan Moore, who hadn't been to a comic shop in years, actually broke his rule and went to a comic shop just to get Kingdom Come. So that's pretty cool for him. It talks about how he lives right next to his dad and mom, still in Chicago. His dad was a preacher just like Norman Mccay. The character of Norman Mccay was based on his dad, but they had to change him from an optimist to a pessimist, which they talk about in another article in here. This is going to become a recurring theme as they talk about this. This is fairly well freaking done. I mean, it's not an autobiography by any means, but it's interesting, and for $6, geez. And Steve Darnell shows up. I think it's Darnell, maybe Darnell. Steve Darnell from Uncle Sam shows up to his house, and they watch Mr. Show because apparently Darnell does not have cable, so he comes over to watch Mr. Show. That's like a weekly get-together thing for him. The thing that I guess maybe I had read it before and just blocked it out, but I don't think so. Like, I did not know that Alex Ross hates the freaking X-Men. Why do you hate the X-Men so much? Quote, Alex Ross, there's no iconic heart to the X-Men that fights for the ethics of what superheroes are about. On the surface, they could argue it's a morality play, but I see it as little more than gangs against gangs. I was like, dang, dude. Some people have a problem with it being like, you know, Charles Xavier training like a child army. Maybe I might fall into that camp post the Chris Claremont years, when Chris Claremont kind of started to make it fairly obvious they weren't going to class. They were just learning to be good soldiers. That's probably the coolest thing about here. So these are like drawn conclusions. Alex Ross has a reputation for being having strong opinions. So they ask him about a bunch of stuff to just get him like riled up and crap. I'm not going to even get into that because it's just whatever. It's like, Aunt May, alive or dead? And he's like, dead, duh. She died and she should be dead. And it's like, yeah, okay. I agree with you, but it's not going to happen. But like the one thing he does say in here is Hal Jordan or Kyle Rayner. Message to Ron Mars. Give it up, Ron. Hal's better. Hal's what people are going to remember in 20 years anyway. Give it up, Ron, now. Throughout this magazine, And the interviews in here span, like, I think about a 2 to 2.5 year period as they were done for Wizard, and they've been compiled and expanded here a little bit. He constantly slams on Kyle Rayner. They ask him later, like, I forget if it's like, what character did you hate most drawing? Or what character are you never going to draw again? He's like, Kyle Rayner, because Kyle Rayner is the devil, and I hate him because he's not Hal Jordan. And it's funny because he's always like, he's not Hal Jordan, and you're like, I know enough about Alex Ross to know Alex Ross is obsessed, like myself, with Alan Scott. So I'm like, I think he just really actually has a very strong opinion on the fact that Kyle Rayner was a weak character. Sorry, guys. I know there's a lot of people who love Ron Marr's run on that, but like every time I read a quote from Alex Ross where he was like, oh yeah, and by the way, here's a cheap shot at Kyle Rayner, I was like, oh man of my own heart, I guess. Okay, so designer genes. This is basically talking about what Earth X is going to be. Do you know what Earth X is? If you don't know what Earth X is, it was a project that he did for Marvel where it was an experiment. And I had long thought it was an experiment, right? My contention when I read it was that, like, Alex Ross took one of his ideas, which usually when he's teamed with another writer and he has to paint the interiors and the writer makes a suggestion like, hey, we should probably make the story better, Alex Ross is like, yeah, you're right, that would be a way better picture. And he does it. But like, this was an experiment on him being like, I am really tired of doing interiors because I'm going crazy. So I am just going to do these like Kingdom Come redesigns for Marvel characters. I am only going to paint the covers and I'm going to put my name all over it and I'm going to sell it to Marvel as an Alex Ross project. And I'm going to do the covers right. So Alex Ross fanatics are going to have to buy it. And I'm also going to do multiple Alex Ross covers for each issue. Now this is long before variants were like a big thing, right? He is at this point, I don't think Alex Ross thought of it as like piping fans, but I think Alex Ross was trying to design a model of how much money can I get out of how little work I can put in. And I hate Earth X. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it so much. And it drives me crazy because I own it. All of it. You hate Earth X. Why would you own it? Because the freaking covers are gorgeous. Some of them. Some of the covers are really lackluster. I never knew why. As I said, continuing a theme here, there is an ad in the back that clears this up. This is an ad for Dynamic Forces covers, right? Well, the guy who's doing a bunch of the pencils on the inside, John Paul Leon, he's not a bad artist. He's not. But Alex Ross is like, he's realistic and his tone will match mine. So, I don't really see it being a big difference. It is a big difference. It's a huge, jarring, awful, terrible, no good, bad difference for me. Because you get these wonderful pencils like that I saw as previews for Earth X, and then I don't even know if they actually show you any of the interior artwork in here, because it is freaking hot garbage compared. And it's not terrible. Actually, it's really not that great art. It is confusing at points. I'm not a big fan of it, but it's not terrible art in the sense of like he's hiding people's feet all the time. But it is certainly not Alex Ross. And in this article at the end, he actually is like, makes a point of stating, yeah, like basically I'm doing this to prove that if I put my name on something and I paint the covers, I'll be able to sell it that way, whether I paint the interiors or not. And it was freaking successful, and I bought into it. And he talks about how Earth X is like going to be the spiritual successor to Marvel's and Kingdom Come, but it's not going to be repetitive. That's just a line of bull fecal matter that is disproved in this article. Around this point, Alex Ross was firing on all cylinders. He was just doing an immense amount of work. I loved his stuff, and Earth X happened, and I long wondered what this train wreck of a series was. And they break it down in here. In Designer Genes, they actually tell you the genesis of Earth X. Earth X was a proposal sent to Alex Ross by Wizard magazine. Okay, Wizard used to do supplemental comic books, and what these was they were issue halves, or they were previews, or they were ash can editions as we would know them now. The small comics that come out. Image is very much into still giving retailers ash can editions, small preview editions. So Wizard really popularized having a preview to a series in an issue like 1/2, or having an actual just preview to a series where you saw really nice character designs and concepts and maybe a write-up of what the series was going to be about with some previews of the art. Well, they sent Alex Ross a invitation to do an Earth X Wizard magazine supplemental comic book. And in his words, their plot pitch was Marvel characters done in the Kingdom Come universe. And the Kingdom Come universe is essentially like everybody got superpowers, and that is really bad. That's always been really bad, right? With absolute power comes absolute corruption, blah, blah, blah. So the world is like, essentially, it's like post-apocalyptic. There's still society to some point, but it is like on the brink of freaking collapse. They call up Alex Ross, and he's still on his promotional tour for Kingdom Come in 1990, end of 96, beginning of 96. It's end of 96, actually. So he's on that tour, and he's like, nope, that's a terrible idea, not going to do it. It's repetitive and derivative and blah, blah, blah. So it's stuck in his head as a concept pitch, like, yeah, cool, a little Wizard 1/2 supplemental reimagined. That's cool. I enjoyed that. I have that. That was not bad. I love the covers, so cool, okay. But like, that is actually where the story came from. It didn't come from any like meaningful thought that Ross had, in the sense that with Kingdom Come, you can tell that that is a love letter to Superman. It is him telling a Christ allegory, like a failed Christ figure allegory with Superman. He can argue that all he wants. His dad's a preacher, whether he's religious in the sense of like he beats it into people or not, he subconsciously drug that in. And I don't think you really even have to read into that, because I didn't know anything about Alex Ross when I picked up on that. He's redesigned all of these characters for Marvel in a single night in a completely post-apocalyptic world. I think that was Alex Ross's idea of being original with Earth X, was instead of being on the brink of collapse, things have just gone too far. Everybody's got superpowers, and the world's just gone to complete crap. Spider-Man's fat and retired. Reed Richards has killed Dr. Doom, so now he is Dr. Doom. That's Captain America. The A is carved into his head. He's like one gigantic scar. Don't get me wrong, they're awesome concepts. They're beautiful to look at. It is a terrible freaking story that makes no sense. It's absolutely disjointed. X-51, Machine Man, one of my favorite characters. I actually happen to love that series. Was really excited to hear Alex Ross was going to be... Oh, nope, yeah, you basically didn't do anything with him, because it's all John Paul Leon who does all the interiors on that series. Extremely disappointing. He says that he hates the X-Men in the very first interview. So in this one, I've always been an X-Men hater, but to actually defeat the X-Men, I embraced them. So that's why he turned everybody into superheroes. That was his cop-out for turning everybody into superheroes. I'm not copying Kingdom Come. I'm just going to turn everybody into superheroes so I don't have to deal with the X-Men. No, I don't believe it. Although, admittedly, I miss this basically every time. Maybe it's because I hate Earth X and I've never really looked into it. I hate that series. God, I'm going to rip on that a lot throughout this probably. Anyway, Earth X is his like way of being like, yeah, don't worry, we're not going to deal with the X-Men at all, because they're completely non-relevant at all. Instead of X-Men, it's X-Earth. I was like, okay, awesome. And the thing that kind of peeves me off about knowing that this was originally, he was like, no, that's derivative. Wizard, you shouldn't ask me to do that because I'm Alex Ross and I'm above that. To hype this series, in issue 77, there was a supplemental issue 1/2. And there was also an issue 0. No, it wasn't issue 0. It's a preview. Just a preview that came with this. And I think there might have been one other original Earth X that came, because there's one for each of these. They're like Earth X, Universe X, Paradise X. It just kept going and go. It was a genesis of Alex Ross being like, look, you have to buy my covers. Yeah. So moving on. Works in progress. This is an interesting article. This is talking about what Alex Ross is going to be doing. Okay, so 1999, yeah, internet is in play. You can look up stuff, but still, news is not traveling the way that it does now, and it's not being shared the way it is now. Basically, like, you had to go to, like, a very few outlets for your information on what comics were coming out. It was like Previews magazine was telling you what was coming out in 2 months. Wizard was hyping up whatever Wizard was hyping. There really, there was Comics Journal, which covered like older stuff, and there was like Back Issue and Alter Ego. I mean, I got into all of that stuff, but there was nothing that I could get that I knew of where it was like, yeah, here's like lists of stuff that's coming out from your favorite guys. And a lot of times those lists that you would see when you did see them were filled with reeking things that never happened. Every single thing that Alex Ross talks about in here has come to fruition. And I think it actually happened in the timetable that he talks about in this interview, surprisingly. One of the cool things that I found out from this interview was that Alex Ross loves Superman. He is really not too much into Superman knockoffs. Like, don't call Captain Marvel a Superman ripoff to Alex Ross. That is not a smart move, guys. I've always wondered, why did he draw Rob Liefeld's frickin' Supreme? He redesigned Supreme, right? And in this, they say that he redesigns the dog and Suprema for free. Like, he did, it's called the Supreme Handbook. And I've got it, and I can never find anything about it online, but it is just filled with these sketches and their designs that Alex Ross made for Supreme because he really loved Alan Moore's run on Supreme. He actually admits that. Yeah, I just really like what Alan Moore was doing with the series. And it's kind of cool because, like, it seems like him and Moore, either they just mutually respect the hell out of each other's work, or they might actually know each other. It's kind of sad that while, like, Alan Moore was still semi-cogent and firing, like, on all cylinders, he didn't coax Alex Ross into doing a fully painted project with him, because that would have been really crazy to see. Superman, Peace on Earth, the Treasury oversized special that Alex Ross did for DC has come out. They're talking about the other proposed projects, and Batman Fear is one of them, and there's Wonder Woman War. He doesn't have the cover for Captain Marvel because he hasn't gotten, I don't even think he's gotten approval to do Captain Marvel technically yet. One of the interesting things that I learned from this is this series was essentially like the last thing on any kind of real scale that Alex Ross would do interiors for. And he actually says, it's cool, he tells you why in this article, and it's because they're oversized. And his art is better represented, and it gives him more room to work, and it makes them stand out. And you also find out in another article, because I'm telling you guys, this is really worth your $5 if you find it. And you can usually find this for like 50 cents or $1. You pay more in shipping. And he talks about how he uses the oversized reprints from DC and Marvel that they used to do, the limited collector's edition and the Treasury editions, for reference. And that's why he's vested in these things being big, and it's super cool. He also talks about his Batman book and how it's kind of unexpected from him. And I was like, what? Because Alex Ross, I didn't think about it, but at the time, Alex Ross essentially hadn't put his iconic spin on Batman. Like, Batman never suits up and goes Batman in Kingdom Come. That's a story about Superman, and everybody else just essentially revolves around that. And I was like, that's true, actually. Because I always think of, like, Batman R.I.P., and I think he might have actually just done that entire Morrison run on Batman, but he had a clip where he did a lot of Batman, and it's really cool. But I have an illustration that comes to mind for me when I think of Batman. There's an image that comes to mind, and they have it reprinted in here in both forms. Awesome. So I can show it to you guys later, but there's a image that Alex Ross did where Batman's back is super scarred up. It just shows you what would actually happen to somebody like that. They give you the origin of that, and they give you the Batman black and white reprinted edition from several years later. Super cool. But they talk about how, or Alex Ross specifically, he talks about how he wants to come in and do basically what he did for Superman and put his own unique stamp on the character. He is very, very reticent to talk about Captain Marvel or Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman hasn't even really been revealed yet, so he won't talk about anything about that. And then like this little bit here, it takes up a lot of space because obviously like that's big news. You know, he's working for DC doing interiors, blah, blah, blah. So in here they mentioned that he's going to be doing a Captain Marvel Kingdom Come statue, covers for Astro City, and continuing his Alan Moore love, he is going to be doing all the America's Best Imprint first issues through Jim Lee's Wildstorm. Man, did that end up being a real show by the end. Toys R Us. Not going to talk a whole lot about this. I will tell you about some of the cool things. This is a good shot of his studio, aka his freaking living room. Apparently his kitchen is filled up with like reference material in a filed way that he understands but looks like utter bedlam to everybody else. This is his toy room. Yeah, don't worry, we're not going to talk a lot about Alex Ross's toys. And this is what I mean when I went into this being like, is there going to be any relevant information whatsoever from a Wizard publication about Alex Ross? That's a 1941 Superman doll. Super cool. It's the first ever Superman, I don't think it was the first toy, but I know it's the first Superman doll. This Space Ghost is stand-up, has been in every shot of his studio that I've ever seen. He's had it since his college days. This is the Superman stand-up. It's fairly new at this point here. And this I've seen in a lot of shots as well. It's a custom Shazam figure with a custom box and everything that a buddy of his made for him. He's got a ton of Migos here. I mentioned the Migos for a very specific reason that we'll find out about later. And then he has a complete collection with like a bunch of the, I don't know if they're prototypes, but like he's got all the super rare superpowers figures. And this is like, you know, back before they were ridiculously expensive. So I assume he does have at least some of the prototype stuff. But that was the stuff that I saw that interested me. Moving on. This right here, basic training. Talk about some freaking inadvertent historical, just wonderful context to put things in. Basic training is going to be Alex Ross walking you through how he does a regular painting in like, I think 4 pages. So he's going to teach you how to paint in like 4 pages. He doesn't teach you how to paint at all. It just kind of tells you a little bit about his process. But the important thing about this is that this cover has gone on to become one of the most iconic covers in Batman's history. And it's funny because in the interview just prior to this, he talks about how people just don't equate him with Batman. And Batman is notoriously missing from this, but it is still one of the most famous Batman covers. Ross had done the original character designs for Batman the Animated Series, and he knew Paul Dini really well. They ended up working on the Superman piece. They did do the Shazam. They did Wonder Woman and Batman. And Alex Ross speaks really highly in every interview I've ever read or heard of that he gets brought up. No one knew, obviously, that this piece would become so iconic, but it's cool because Ross actually says here, him and Paul Dini are close enough friends, he doesn't even remember if Paul Dini asked him to do it or if he asked Paul Dini to do it because the idea seems so cool to him. I think it's also interesting, Ross uses a lot of photo references. I mentioned that before, and you get to see the actual photo references that he shot that are the faces that he used, and it turns out that he is the Joker. It's super cool. I didn't know that. If you look at him and in this last shot specifically, like where he's kind of got his head tilted and doing the smile, it's very obvious, like even the receding hairline and everything, but I had never noticed it. I'm a pretty big Alex Ross fan. There's one of the limited collector's editions, limited, I think it's C25, that he has set out to draw a specific reference for the Joker's head. the way that he wants it to kind of look. And he also talks about he has photo reference from Conrad Veidt. Yeah, it's Conrad Veidt. I know that. Yeah, it's Conrad Veidt from The Man Who Laughs, which is obviously the movie that the Joker was based on, maybe. This is pretty cool. This is a Lydecker ad for Arrow collars from like the early 1900s, and that's where Alex Ross got the initial design layout. For Harley Quinn reference, he also uses a action figure that was produced off of the models for Batman the Animated Series. He says he won't use it for any kind of costume or outfit reference, but he does use it for general shape because she was designed as a cartoon, and I think he tried to bring that in. It's really interesting. He has a large collection of Migos, and he'll often use them. I don't remember if he says he used them in this or not. We don't ever get to see any pictures of them, but he says that he'll use Migos, and they're posable enough he can have them interact, and he can mimic the lighting sources off of them in real time and move the lighting and adjust it and get it more dramatic, whatever, instead of just using photo references for characters interacting. He'll pose them up and have them holding each other and stuff. He did the whole piece. I think he basically essentially only works in gouache at this point, which is a watercolor medium. He talks about his process a little bit. I never read a lot about his process because I was never going to be able to replicate it. But one of the interesting things is most painters start with like the lighter primary colors on the bottom, and then they work their way up building the darks, and they'll put in the details last. And Alex Ross does the exact opposite of that. He never really he doesn't measure anything on his drawings to leave space for the logo illustrations like a lot of guys do. He just kind of wings it. That's how good Alex Ross is. He's using a Winsor Newton Series 7 number 4 brush, I think. It's a real common brush, but that's what he's using. So usually Alex Ross will lay down pencils, and he'll do like pretty tight pencil layout. Then he'll set the drawing down, walk away for 24 hours, come back to it, and make sure he still is happy with the layout and the design and everything, and then he'll paint it. He talks about this painting being so freaking simple that he's just going to be able to, it's like sit down, do the pencils, ink that, then paint over it, and do that all in like 7 hours or so. It's ridiculous, dude. Ridiculous. Like one of the most beautiful covers. And he just sat down and he's like, yeah, the background's all black and blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay. So I know there's a lot of people who haven't seen Alex Ross painting, and it's pretty cool because there's a picture in here, right here. He's finishing up the picture by using airbrushing, and although he does primarily work in gouache, he does use other mediums. He usually doesn't mix mediums. If he does oil, he'll do oil on canvas. If he does gouache, he'll do gouache. But what he does do is he'll finish off a lot of his paintings with an airbrush to just get more of a ethereal sheen and a glow. He talks about how he's going to ship this thing too. Alex Ross talks about shipping his original paintings back in the day, and about how he's just going to stick this in a box and wrap some stuff around it and be done with it. Even at this point in 1999, I think that was getting a little bit chintzy, and Wizard's like, really? And he's like, yeah, really. The only one that I've ever, really tripped about sending in was the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that thing was monstrous. It was huge. And I was like, you just nailed that? He was like, I stuck it in between a couple of pieces of masonite. And I was like, you are a braver man than I am, sir. As a side note, Alex Ross at the end here gives advice of being like, they're like, what advice would you give to aspiring artists? Because we have to ask that question because we prefaced this by saying we're going to train people to paint like you, which is not what this article is about. It's more about watching you and your process. They ask him like, what would you tell aspiring artists? And he's like, you should be professional and be on time and you'll succeed. And if Alex Ross has done anything in the comic industry, it is definitely those two things. So, rough cuts. This, I mean, for what it is, given the limited space page that we have for this kind of stuff, they do actually pull out some pretty cool stuff. These are early, unused, mostly unpublished at the time, unpublished sketches that Alex Ross had done. This is one he did in high school. Apparently, just like everybody else, Alex Ross worshipped Bernie Wrightson, and it's a Frankenstein piece. This is a portrait that he's very proud of that he did while he was in art school. His mom always reinforced the idea to him that you needed a light box or use a projector and kind of trace somebody's face to get a likeness real perfect. And Alex Ross wanted to achieve realism using the photo reference, but not tracing it so that you could manipulate it more and just have more input on what the final design looks like. And this, he says, is the proof in the pudding that you can do that to him. He achieved that there. He worked for an ad agency before he worked there. This is a Budweiser campaign that he put together with the Star Trek The Next Generation guys. That's really funny. This is, I think it's an Oldsmobile. Yeah. So it's an Oldsmobile pitch to Leonard Nimoy. And I was like, oh, another gag pitch. No, that one was real. They actually, that's Leonard Nimoy's daughter, and Nimoy and her were supposed to be in freaking Vulcan makeup. He actually ended up doing that campaign, but not in the Vulcan makeup. This page, I don't really care for his take on Miracle Woman. This is just a personal Sandman sketch he did. Hawkeye's daughters were an idea that he kind of kicked out to Marvel as a way to make Hawkeye more interesting. Fairly prophetic. They didn't really ever use twins or anything, but, you know, Kate Bishop and all. She's pretty integral at this point. This is the first ever piece of DC art that he really did, and he turned it in, he showed it to DC, hoping to get some work, and they loved it. They loved everybody, except for Superman. So if you look, Superman looks like the Fleischer Superman, and they were like, that's not what Superman looks like. And even here, he's like, I knew I had a long road to hoe with that. There's some interesting flavor text that he gave about each piece. That Batman is not Michael Keaton. It didn't look like Michael Keaton to me, but apparently a lot of people think that it is. That's Freddie Mercury from the from the cover of Queen 2. It's strange, but it's totally true. The other guy from Queen is Roger Taylor, and if you look, that's Freddie Mercury, and Wonder Woman is Roger Taylor. It's a really great piece. It's kind of loose for him. I think you can see a lot more of the airbrushing technique that he relied on a little bit more back then. But for proof of pudding concept, like, hey guys, I got some talent. You guys want me to do some work? That's solid. These are some redesigns. He worked on these redesigns in 1989 into 1990 with Kurt Busiek, or Busiek, however you say his name, Busiek. So Kurt Busiek is doing a series called Open Space for Marvel Comics, and he wanted to get Alex Ross to do a story because he came across Alex Ross's work in Terminator Burning Earth, which was Alex Ross's first professional work in the comic industry. So Alex Ross did a completed story, turned it in, got it approved for issue 5, and then they canceled that series, Open Space, with issue 4. They say in the flavor text that has been reprinted, that the story that Alex Ross did has been reprinted as a supplemental comic that came with this. This was not sealed when I got it. It did not come with a supplemental comic. If you have that, or you know scans or anything like that, please get a hold of me. I would very much enjoy seeing it, because that would be his first work for Marvel Comics. It got approved. It was going to be published. The series just got canned. So I would really like to see it. I'm going to keep my eyes out for it. But obviously, that was probably the coolest thing that I learned from this entire thing. The other thing, I guess, is, man, it's hard to see him there. See, okay, this is like a Wizard magazine publication, and they just didn't think about this kind of stuff. The binding for this is actually fairly decent. It's held up well over the years, and you can see I can paw at it pretty good. There's just so much ditch loss here, bro. You totally lose, basically, the Flash. He's based on the 90s live-action TV Flash, which actually was not bad. I liked it, and apparently Alex Ross dug it. The only guy he doesn't really talk about references for that, because, like, I'm pretty sure that he even says it in the quote again. here like one page later, because they're all based on a dude named Fred McMurray. And yeah, he says Fred McMurray right there. Again, like one page later, because he says Fred McMurray in there. He's really obsessed with Captain Marvel, and that old Fred McMurray portrayal of Captain Marvel is probably the most famous portrayal of Captain Marvel up until now, Shazam. This is the painting I was talking about. This is a color piece that he did for a 1992 art exhibition in Chicago that featured some comic book art. In my opinion, this is one of the best images of Batman. He's out of costume. He's not fighting anybody. I am just in love with that image. And he repainted it several years later for the Batman Black and White series, obviously in black and white, and it's a different painting. It's not just a black and white scan or anything like that. I'll show it to you. It's also in here, which is really nice. But it is like basically the quintessential Batman image for me. This was the only image that he had ever drawn of Vampirella up to that point. He did do one for Dynamite Comics in 2019, finally. I don't know if he did anything while Harris still owned Vampirella. These are the proposal sketches that he gave to DC Comics to show them more after he did after he showed them this painting. These were like concepts of different characters to prove that he could work with guys inside of their series. This is him toying with like how to portray fire. This is pretty cool. They tell you that, and again, if you see Alex Ross, you know this, and you're like, oh, duh, that's obvious now that I know that. It's based on Alex Ross. He is Namor. They show you like people who are this. This is called Photo File. They have a casting call later. It's all just collections of like photo references that he shot for specific images that he painted. These are the original concept design layouts for Kingdom Come. There's some interesting stuff in here, I guess. The only thing that makes this entire thing worthwhile is this. Because I stopped when I saw this. I was like, wait a minute. It's at the end where you find out that like Superman and Wonder Woman are going to have a kid. And that's in like a small, I believe it's 8 pages that was added to Kingdom Come. And that was only for the collected edition. That was not in the actual prestige format series that came out originally. I was like, okay, so they were going to have a kid and John Byrne was right. And then in the flavor text, they're like, and this is a gag page that my editor had me draw to screw with John Byrne because John Byrne was going insane on the internet, screaming about how upset he was that he heard Superman and Wonder Woman were going to have a kid out of wedlock in the series. And I was like, really? Like, that's what John Byrne was so upset about? Okay. All right, John Byrne. Be like that then. So they drew that. And I don't know if they gave it to him or just published it online, but like John Byrne did see it and he went nuts, man. And he called up Mark Waid specifically. And he was like, are you guys actually doing that? Mark Waid was like, no, man. It's interesting that either John Byrne was overreacting that much or the comic industry was really ticked off at John Byrne. Still seems to be pretty ticked off at John Byrne. And they were just like taking pot shots at him because he had an opinion about something. Also kind of a note, it's hilarious because in the flavor text, Alex Ross also mentions that the only reason he ever thought of Wonder Woman and Superman ever going out on a date is because of Action Comics 600, where John Byrne had Wonder Woman and Superman go out on a date. Oh, this is kind of interesting. So Alex Ross, as I said, felt kind of insecure about his Batman, and he drew the Batman armor designs hundreds of times. He just kind of settled on one eventually. Needed a Batman the Animated Series version. He sent it to Paul Dini, and Paul Dini was like, oh, it's trash. Alex Ross says in the flavor text, he was like, if I'd have seen the stuff that they had designed for Batman Beyond, I would have just used the Batman Beyond suit. And I was like, whoa, man, him and Paul Dini were close. Honestly, if you're a Kingdom Come fan, then you've seen basically all of these sketches in other books. They point out, okay, so they do some interesting flavor text, right? The Flash, they never say it in the comic, Alex Ross says. I think they do. that you can't really see him. He's just kind of a blur. But what they don't say, I thought he was mute, but he's not. Only Superman can hear him. I thought that was pretty cool. Bunch of Astro City designs. This is showing you, so when he went to do Supreme, when he gave Supreme his hairstyle, he would not repeat Superman, any of his hairstyles, or any of the Superman derivative characters that have been created over the years, or Superman analogs either. He did sketches of all their hair to make sure it was totally different. That is the level of dedication Alex Ross goes to. I think that's pretty cool. This is the original design for the Batman No Man lenticular design. Lenticular cover is originally only going to be 3 images instead of 5. So instead of the spotlight image that you get to see, it was going to be this him putting on his cowl. Full exposure. Okay, I could spend an hour talking about this article. If you enjoy Alex Ross, if you've not sat down with a magnifying glass, or you're like me and you just kind of miss stuff sometimes, this is really cool. Alex Ross hides little bits like the Now Comics blows and the Annihilate and all of that. Not only is that a hidden thing, but he actually used Annihilate it as a character name in Kingdom Come. They go through a lot of Ross's comics, not everything, mostly Kingdom Come, Burning Earth, and Marvels, and they point out probably like 60% of the really cool Easter eggs visually. There's like the David Letterman that he had to redraw from Terminator Burning Earth. There's the Batman he snuck into Hellraiser. He snuck Lois and Clark into the reporter scene from Marvel's Book 1. There's just some really cool stuff in here. I'm not going to go through all of it, obviously, because we'll just spend a ton of time here. Beatles are at, and Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke are at the FF wedding. They go through all this stuff. They even show you when he does, like, panel homages. It's so cool. This is a really nice article. They walk through the non-obvious stuff from Kingdom Come that's in the restaurant where you see so many things just jam-packed. It kind of draws your attention. They walk through all of that. And they do Uncle Sam. I forgot about that. And here's the other casting call. These are the famous people that he used as references for the characters. If this sounds interesting, like if this article alone sounds interesting, it's worth, you can get this for like $1 and you're going to pay like $3 or $4 in shipping, $2 or $3, $4 in shipping. It's worth the $5 or $6 to pick this up. What, 21 years later? I still think it's cool to have. I had fun reading it. I learned some stuff from it. So cool. They do a breakdown on the Crisis on Infinite Earths cover, telling you who some of the lesser-known characters are. They also, what's really cool is they talk about Superman Peace on Earth, deals with hunger, much larger societal concepts, and Superman dealing with that as a failed Christ archetype. So he didn't think it was right to put in a bunch of cameos from other characters and stories and that kind of stuff. That was pretty cool. I thought that was pretty interesting. Kingdom Come Unplugged, at the time in 1999, would have been freaking gold, because this is the actual original proposal for the series called The Heroic Age that Alex Ross wrote. Kurt Wade revised this. There are also reports that there are stories that Alex Ross was instructed to read, a story that Alan Moore had decided he would never do after DC screwed him on Watchmen. This wizard actually does a fairly good job of backing up my idea that I don't think that that's true. I think Ross wrote the script before he ever had any idea about that, and that the Heroic Age is Alex Ross's idea on things, and that Kurt Wade came in and added a bunch of changes and stuff. At the time, this would have been super revolutionary because you didn't get to see a lot of proposals. Now, I do believe that this proposal has been reprinted in probably like 5 or 6 different collections of this, so you might have even read it. There is still merit to this article in the fact that they got Alex Ross's input on the actual script and the implemented changes and why they happened and what worked and what didn't and that kind of thing as you move along. Fairly interesting, actually. So one of the things that Alex Ross talks about in the preface, it took him too long to get the series out. It took him like a year to get them to approve the series, and then another year and a half or 2 years to actually do the series itself, as in paint it and get everything done and put out. And at the time, it was a fairly like looking forward concept of the proliferation of superheroes and the drowning of the market that was happening in the 90s. And it would have been prophetic. And instead, it ended up coming out in 1996 at kind of just at the height or just before the height of all that stuff. So it seemed like more of a critical attack on the comics industry as opposed to how he had written it as a prophetic vision of the industry that was to come in 1992, 93. I thought that was fairly interesting. Originally, also, apparently, you are never going to see the Spectre. He talks about that being one of the first major big changes. Visually, he just couldn't make it work. Having the Spectre be this disembodied voice, he couldn't do it, so he ended up having to make him into a visual character. The proposal is actually way more upbeat than you would think. That's one of the major things that I see that got changed here. Ross points it out several times throughout the article as it happens. Like they had to change Norman Mccay to much more of a pessimist from an optimist in here. He had a family. They ditched that. And there's a lot of stuff, little stuff like that they changed. One of the major things that they changed is the plot to this was an international plot in the sense that it happens all around the world. Alex Ross made the decision to have the big catalyst for the Kansas disaster happen in Kansas to make sure that it resonated with Superman, made it a Superman story. Another thing was Superman wasn't going to be totally retired. He was just going to be much less active. In this, he's gone, so it's a big deal when he comes back. I think that was probably Kurt Busiek being like, hey, yeah, we got to do something about this. Superman and Wonder Woman's relationship in this pitch for the heroic age is basically non-existent. More hinted at than anything else. So John Byrne was way off base blaming Alex Ross for any of that stuff. As I mentioned, one of the other major changes that happened was it was going to be an international story, and there was going to be much more of a governmental role and an international governmental role as well. It explains a lot, and you get to read a little bit more about that here and what would have happened. The bar scene where Superman goes to recruit people and gets totally crapped on is apparently inspired by the bars from The Crow, because Alex Ross thought they looked really, really cool, and that was topical. One of the things that he mentions in here is that originally Hawkman, Hawkwoman, and Supergirl were all going to play like more pivotal roles. He thought it was more poetic to have Supergirl and Superboy go into the future to join the Legion of Superheroes, and that's what happened to them or whatever. But like what happened to Hawkman? He's one of my favorite leaguers, and he just always constantly gets crapped on. They talk a little bit more about the Flash being like that hyperactive blur and his speech only being discernible to Superman. Alex Ross's proposal also notably did not have Wonder Woman being nearly as aggressive. Kurt Busiek came on and added that, saying like she's an Amazon. It would make total sense for her to be the aggressor. I thought that was pretty cool because that's not Alex Ross's idea. It is more of Kurt Busiek's input on the idea, and Alex Ross has taken some flack for his portrayal of women in Kingdom Come. So that's, reading the proposal, that's kind of interesting. One of the other big things lacking from Ross's original proposal is the villains. In the finished version of Kingdom Come, the superheroes are still their own worst enemies, but there are villains that work behind the scenes that brainwash Billy Batson, and this is basically not the case. They just show up in essential cameo roles in this. Batman ends up becoming a doctor, I think, at the end of the finished version of Kingdom Come, but in this they just have him being a successful businessman, and they announce that Gotham Industries is taking over LexCorp. Bodies of work, this would have been really, really invaluable to have pre the internet being able to tell you all of this stuff. It is a fairly comprehensive look at the different covers for Ross's books that he's done and the variations thereof, like the different editions of Marvel's, as well as the different editions of Kingdom Come. They've got some of the lesser known covers, like a Spectre cover. They've got the Empty Love Stories. They've got his Primetime cover. They've got the Big Bang comics, some Astro City stuff. They've got the where is it? They've got the Madman in here. Yeah, Madman Special, which I always really liked. And then they've got some of his other stuff they do not have. His super famous Doc Samson Man of Bronze cover in here. I think it's for issue 3 or whatever. So it's not complete even at this point. But it is pretty cool. There's the Earth X preview, because that's the preview special. And they used this as a way to hype up the series and sell the pitch to Marvel. Like, he says that in the interview. And they ask him, like, really? And he's like, yeah. They're like, wow, so you, like, read Wizard magazine? And he's like, no, I read the Jack Kirby Collector, and I get Wizard to see if I'm in it. And that's it, honestly. It's hilarious. They've got some other, like, lithographs and some cool stuff in here. They're missing a Frank Frazetta magazine, Frank Frazetta art magazine cover that he did. But they've got some, like, really cool stuff in here. Some lesser known stuff. It's really well put together. They do have this one, the Chicago Comic-Con cover. You don't see that one pop up a whole lot. His postcard that he did from DC, I've seen that in, you know, a few places at this point. That's not easy. Like, that was not easy to see an image of back in the day. That was digging deep. And then they have a pretty cool Alex Ross, X marks the spot. Well, Al X marks the spot. And, like, this isn't even all the stuff you get. This is all the stuff you get. It's basically everything he'd ever done. It was awesome. The coolest thing that I learned about this was the open space issue, which would have been his first thing that he ever did for Marvel Comics. So I realized that once I got online and saw another cover for this, they had done an updated, expanded, and revised edition, right? This is a hardcover that Wizard put out, and it's updated and expanded and all of that. So I'm like, oh, awesome. It will be in there. Obviously, they included, because they did such a decent job with this, they obviously would have included that open space supplemental comic, which did not come with this, which I bought new from my comic shop, who laughed at me for ordering it at the time. It did not come with the supplemental comic. So obviously, since it is updated and expanded, then it will come with it, and it does not. What updated and expanded means is it has, I think, like 16 pages of more, like, gallery images, and they're not covers. They're more of, like, the plates and Warner Brothers stuff that he did, like this. It was kind of disappointing. If you know where to get that open space number 5 story that was published as a Wizard supplemental comic for the Millennium edition of Alex Ross, please let me know. Thanks so much for sticking with me. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, do me a favor, hit that like button. If you really enjoyed what you saw, get down in the comment section below and let me know. If you really, really enjoyed what you saw, do me a super big favor and Hulk smash that subscribe button. If you do that, make sure you ding the little notification bell so you keep up with these videos that I'm dropping all the time with trivia and these off the beaten racks and magazine analyzations and new interviews and stuff. It's just crazy stuff all the time now. So make sure you hit that notification button. If you have any questions about anything that I mentioned in this video, if you have any suggestions for an episode you'd like to see, or you'd like to see my digitally available sources or further reading on anything that I talked about in this interview, they can be found in the description link below. Thanks again for sticking with me. I really hope you enjoyed. And as always, I really, truly, and honestly ask only 2 things. Keep hitting those local shops and keep reading comics.